Welcome to this Conveyancing Matters chat with Simon Lumb. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
So welcome to another episode of Conveyancing Matters, and today we've got another special guest. So welcome to the show, Simon Lumb.
Thank you, Stuart. Nice to see you again, and hello, Lorraine.
Hello, Simon. Welcome. Thanks for coming. So you two guys know each other in a different life. So Stu, perhaps you want to lead us into how Simon came to be a guest.
Well, yeah, I mean, it all sort of originates from ways in which we can maybe improve the conveyancing process and improve, the experience that our clients have from when they buy their property to when they come to sell it. So one of the ways in which we can do that, we've all spoken about upfront information, but of course it's how we produce it and how we manage it. So when I met Simon, he introduced to me property logbooks. So Simon, why don't you give us a bit of spiel about what you do and the company you work for, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is Simon Lumb. I'm a director of the National Deeds Depository, a property logbook company, and also a founder member of the Residential Logbook Association, hence the background for today's session. And yeah, thanks for the intro, Stuart. Clearly, we'd look forward to doing more work with you at some stage in the future. And I think if I can jump straight in, I think that's been one of the issues for all property logbook companies. There's a few out there with slightly different routes to market and different approaches, different add-ons, different services, etc. But from my company's perspective, we almost exclusively work directly with the conveyancing community, where a logbook is registered on successful completion of a purchase. And in all the conversations, except one firm who I won't mention, they've all got it. They all say it's a great idea. And it's almost one of these things that's become so common sense that it's never got to top of the list, because there's always been something, either a greater priority or too busy or whatever. So maybe with the predicted downturn coming, there's maybe a little bit more time for conveyancers to have a look at incorporating logbooks into their offering.
So Simon, just for the uninitiated, just explain, in terms of your company, just explain, sounds a ridiculous question, but what is a property logbook? What's the concept? What's in it? Just explain for the benefit of the viewers that don't know.
Yeah, so a property logbook, and I'll try and be as succinct as possible, which, as I said earlier, isn't my strength. But a property logbook is a sustainable digital record of data and information relevant to your property. And that might sound obvious, but actually I think the key word there is sustainable, because what we create and other logbook providers create is this aggregated information that follows the property through various landmarks throughout that ownership, whether it be the purchase, whether it be the sale, or whether it's activity in between, whether it be remortgaging, switch mortgaging, or significant enhancements to a property. It's all recorded, and the sustainability is key, because what we see is a lot of solutions and ideas out there which start at the left and end at the right, and it's an arrow, comes to a full stop, possibly on successful completion of a purchase. And then the data and information that's collected kind of goes into one of several potential areas, but invariably in 15 years' time, people can't remember, and that data is sometimes lost, which then means all the information that was carefully aggregated and checked, etc., has to be refound for the next time round.
I mean, that's the thing, really, because if we'd all for that, well, you two perhaps aren't old enough, are you? But if you'd started this sort of 20, 25 years ago, Simon, we'd all have it on floppy disks, and none of us would be able to access it now. So, I mean, for a complete IT, dork like me, how does the sustainability bit work? Is that the clever techie bit that you guys are doing in the background all the time?
it's not really clever. It's using existing technology, but the whole idea is that the logbook template and the information and data that's essentially uploaded by the conveyancer on completion is then handed over to the homeowner. So the homeowner takes custody of that data and uploads information as and when that's relevant to the upkeep of the property throughout ownership. And I think we talk about education, and it's a kind of an easy and sometimes a kind of glib phrase that's thrown around, but it will take time for education around maintaining records on your property. I mean, it still astounds me that we all understand that if we have a hire purchase policy for a car, then we have to maintain records on that car. Yet we invariably borrow substantially more money for a property, and yet the lender doesn't seem to be too bothered about what happens to that property. And the homeowner is starting to understand, certainly this is our feedback from our clients, that they're understanding the ratio between showing that they're maintaining a property, servicing the elements within that property, to actually give themselves a better chance of selling that property quicker or at a higher price when they come to do that. Because let's be honest, most people, when they buy a property, at some stage in the future, that property is going to be sold.
I think one of the key points as well is that one of the big changes in recent times, certainly within the last 10, 15 years, is the volume of information that relates to a property. So, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have fencer certificates, we didn't have electrical certificates, gas certificates, cavity wall insulation certificates, guarantees, planning permissions, covenant consents. If you go on and on and on, there's a lot of information that can reside with the property.
I think you're absolutely right, Stuart. And listen, I'm not a conveyancer. I love you guys to bits, and I understand what a hard job you guys have. And you're absolutely right. There's more and more data that seems to be relevant now for a property purchase to go through, and that's part of the problem. Because if this data is lost, then a lot of time and effort and money is taken. Say next time round, wondering whether that document actually existed, never mind finding it. So if this property is kept in a safe, secure and regulated form that is available to both sets of conveyancers, then it takes an element of that uncertainty out and perhaps does away with the time and cost element of things like indemnity insurance policies, for example.
So are you saying then that the logbook is kind of, say on a sale, I'm selling my house, I've maintained my property logbook, but I'm perhaps, I'm a bit of an overkeen homeowner, Simon, I've bunged everything in it, Uncle Tom Cobley and everything else. Is that logbook then immediately available to the seller's conveyancer, my conveyancer, and the buyer's conveyancer? I mean, does the seller's conveyancer have the opportunity to have a look and say, well, actually, that's not relevant, or that might muddy the water, or because is that not a bit of a confidentiality issue potentially?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, again, there's work going on to try and streamline this, and we're not in control of the whole narrative, of course, because we're kind of not inventing the rules. But absolutely, the seller's conveyancer would be the first port of call in handing over elements of that logbook data that were relevant for the buyer's conveyancer, and the cycle goes. The cycle goes on. There's elements of data that are open to conveyancers, and there's elements of data that are open to homeowner for upload. Everything within an RLBA logbook has a date and time stamp and an audit of where that comes from. So when the data is looked at, there's a proper record of provenance, and the conveyancer will use his or her expertise to look at that information on those merits.
So tell us a little bit then about the RLBA then, Simon. What's that, and where do you fit into that
Okay.
lexicon?
Even though logbook is one word, it is the RLBA because we thought 4 letters looked better. But the RLBA is a Residential Logbook Association, and actually it puts a bit of a timestamp on its genesis, because it was originally the idea of MHCLG, which is a precursor to DLUC, as you know, and elements of the home buying and selling group. There are a number of logbook companies all running around, Conveyancing Association, SLC, and various others, as well as the halls of government. And we all, as individual companies, thought we were doing a great job of making progress. But the reality is, government is not placed to back one commercial organization ahead of others, and it was in that forum that they actually pulled a number of companies together, I say all ostensibly doing the same thing, to say, guys, you need to get together, form an association, and our recommendation would be, look at minimum core data sets. So you're all doing different things, but at the core of what you're collecting is this set of data that is going to have relevance and be useful for conveyancers and other stakeholders in the process next time round. Secondly, it would be great if you could develop a register, so conveyancing systems and others could have access to that to find out whether logbooks exist or not, because you may be aware in the BASB form, for example, there's a reference to logbooks now for a conveyancer to check whether a logbook exists. So the register now makes that question an easier one to answer. And the third one was just really reiterating the interoperability of logbooks and logbook data, so it can move on through the process, through conveyancers and through seller to buyer, buyer to seller, and on and on.
So how, Simon, would we know whether the logbook's in existence? So how do we go to the register?
It's an ongoing process. We have launched the register, and we have a small number of conveyancing firms and their software actually API'd into the register. So an address, a UPRN, postcode can be searched, and that will notify whether a logbook exists and provide you with details of the logbook provider.
So it's one register for all providers, Simon?
That are members of the RLBA, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So I know you said you didn't want to mention the firm that objected, but I'm interested to know what it seems obvious. I mean, I always have concerns about confidentiality. I always have concerns about, in a way, too much information sometimes, which I sometimes think can be unhelpful. But what was the objection to the one firm you mentioned put forward? Because it does seem a pretty obvious thing.
Okay, I'll give my view on it. I think the company concerned were actually scanning all their files. Everything was digitized, and they were essentially keeping their own record of client transactions. So that's fine, and a lot of firms do that, but that doesn't help the process. It just keeps everything in-house, and you have just a silo of data for that particular company. And in honesty, I'm not mentioning the company, so I can say I think they saw logbooks as a threat to
competition.
Threat to that. Yeah.
So it's not it's not an objective objection, is it? It's one born out of self-interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Lorraine, I want to say as well that the logbook actually has a very definite benefit for the conveyancer as well. I mean, let's hope we understand that the homeowner will and should get benefit ultimately from maintaining his or her logbook. But the way my company works through registering via conveyancers at completion, if you like, is through the NDD system. We maintain a dialogue with that client post completion, which it's kind of early days, but it will without doubt improve retention rates, which are very, very difficult to monitor, to be honest, because of the time scale involved. Will certainly improve referral rates, could bring additional kind of will probate type work to those existing customers post completion, and the multi-service firms could bring in other areas of business from that existing property client.
So Stu, have you dipped your toe in the logbook pool?
Yeah, so we saw other benefits to it as well. So obviously, simply having the information, at hand at the start is beneficial rather than waiting for a client to come up with things. I would suggest that there are probably numerous properties that have indemnity insurance products sort of listed against them again, where a client may not come forward realizing they can be passed on. But for me, one of the big added benefits, especially when you've got a client that's selling the property, when you're trying to link and profile a client to what they're selling, if they've got a logbook, and there's a history of information that they've been uploading, for me, it ticks a massive box. And in the sort of day and age of property fraud, where, you know, checking a client does own the property, this is one big way around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more, Stuart. Thank you.
Do you think, you know, I suppose with our honesty hats on, there's clearly always going to be, and I guess the people that are subscribing are going to be those sort of keen homeowners anyway, but for a logbook, you know, issued by any company, you know, I think there's got to be a sort of critical mass, hasn't there, where it becomes, there's sort of got to become a tipping point where it becomes, you know, the thing to do, kind of a standard part of the process. And if the responsibility, Simon, really, rightly, to be fair, but lies with the homeowner, you know, 2, 3, 4 years in, you know, how diligent do we think homeowners are going to be? Because most people, you know, often so many clients can't find crucial information or just don't seem to care. I mean, you alluded at the beginning, Simon, to the fact that, you know, people spend more time, you know, on their cars or their, you know, bits of kit than they do their house. And Stu and I see that every day. So how confident are you that, you know, the great British public is actually going to?
Yeah, I think it's one of those. Time will tell, and I think there's also a factor of a kind of changing age demographic as well, and kind of just general comfort with holding digital information, updating digital information. And again, I'm trying to avoid the word education, but it will take time. Take time for this to filter through. What I would say is, buyers are generally sellers and sellers are generally buyers. So everybody ultimately is kind of in the same boat and is the beneficiary. I also think that the move towards material information, you know, the national trading standards and stuff, is kind of playing into the logbook type arena, because logbook companies by and large are geared up to actually create upfront information and populate the likes of BASB and others from property logbook data. So it becomes a very you know, automated and quick process. And again, over time, one hopes this will become more and more standard, and everybody across the whole stakeholder group will embrace it, from, you know, estate agent, buyer, seller, conveyancer, etc., etc.
Yeah, I think that, well, it sounds almost sort of too obvious to say it in a way, Simon, doesn't it? But
Yeah.
I was wondering though, you did mention when you were exchanging emails with Stu that you had I think fairly recently we're going to have a sort of meeting with government, with the relevant department. How have you had that? How did it go? Where are you at with it? I think you
Okay, well, yeah, I can tell you something, but I can't tell you everything. Is that okay? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fine. Will you come back and tell us the rest of it when you
of course, but I got approval from the policy lead at DLUC to use a form of words to say that DLUC is supporting the RLBA and the property logbook members in the rollout of property logbooks to support a government-backed affordable housing program. Now, it's one of a number of government products where there's a restricted lending panel approved by Homes England, and this is quite an exciting breakthrough for us, because it's a proper kind of top-down endorsement of the value of logbooks. This particular scheme is a fairly idiosyncratic scheme, and it really plays into the hands of the role of logbook and the sustainability of the data, particularly because there are very specific criteria for the purchaser to adhere to. And so the logbook helps maintain the integrity of this scheme and ensure the next purchaser meets the local authority requirement for purchasing that discounted property.
Oh, okay, that sounds interesting. Well, as you say, next when you can tell us a bit more, Simon, you'll have to come back.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I felt I was dancing around a little bit there
No, no,
without
that's
mentioning,
fine.
but I guess some of the keen people on the government schemes will have identified which one that might be. But yeah, I'll be more than happy to come back when I can tell you more. Rollout is expected to be November of this year,
Oh, okay, so soon then.
which in kind of government timelines is kind of the day after tomorrow.
Yeah, super quick. So, Simon, Stu's mentioned the F word, fraud. So, you mentioned that there are kind of checkpoints and authentication points. How do I or Stu as property lawyers, when we get a logbook, know that the documents are genuine?
Yeah, I mean it's a very good point. All the documents uploaded by the conveyancing or the conveyancer at the point of purchase are locked. Are locked and cannot be changed, removed, deleted. And as I say, there's a provenance of audit there as to who did it, which company, what time, etc., etc. Clearly, there's a homeowner area where, for example, a boiler maintenance certificate 2 years down the line might have been uploaded. Well, that's there, and it's there to be checked, and the validity of it can be checked by the conveyancer. I think the key point is it's all there in one pot, and available for that conveyancer to do what he or she would ordinarily do. The advantage being it's all there, or all there. A significant percentage of what is required is there day one.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, Stu, where do you think the market goes next with this? Where would you be going with it?
Well, I think for me personally, it's, when the government look at improving the home buying and selling process, we talk about upfront information every 5 minutes. This is just a natural bolt on to that. In the grand scheme of things, to implement a change in the conveyancing system until it becomes mandatory, I think is such a big cultural shift. But I think this is something that you could bring in with, dare I say, relative ease. Like you said, Lorraine, there's not really any negatives to it, are there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, well, I always have, the liability for fraud and the conveyancer endorsing stuff thought in my head, but that's just.
I think from that point of view, is it any different to receiving paperwork from the client direct?
No, I'm not sure it is. I think that's the point, really. I think that's the point,
isn't it? And for me, I think there's so many added benefits, when we're talking about early repayment fees and somebody says, is it the same product? How do you go to the client and say, well, is it the same product? At least if you could check a logbook and see the original mortgage that they took out, things like that. I think there's loads of benefits to it. I think, as Simon says, the educational part, it's getting across the message to people that they need to be more careful in terms of, collecting and keeping information on the property that they own. I suppose from a buyer's point of view, they're not thinking about the point at which they sell, are they? And that may be the sort of hurdle that you need to get over.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think in reality, what we're collecting today is helping the next transaction. But it's not just about home buying and selling, although that's the major landmark within any property ownership cycle. But it's quite interesting the areas that we've got into as a consequence of this initial work we've done with DLUX. So, for example, we're working with the Building Safety Act team, the head of policy. Yeah, well, yeah, it's quite interesting because the danger, and I always say this, the danger by speaking to all these different people is you get a veneer of knowledge about a number of subjects, and you start to believe you're an expert, and that becomes quite dangerous. But we got asked to look at the leasehold deed of certificate and how that might be held within a logbook template as opposed to a completion logbook as such. And the first thing that astounded us and our developers was the existing deed of certificate is actually a Word document. And so anybody could fill one out, and then without any form of kind of check or ID or whatever. And then there's the question of what happens to it when it's filled out. So we've been given the go-ahead to actually have a look at, and this is a bit of an exclusive, by the way, to have a look at actually producing a digital schema for both certificates and actually harboring those within a logbook template for then roll out to a full logbook on transaction for that particular property, as well as incorporating other information within the register to perhaps help the conveyancing community around, whether it's an eligible building or not. We're working with GeoPlace and others on building height register, which you'd think would be quite straightforward, but it ain't. Yeah, it's a massive challenge, but it's got potentially very exciting ramifications.
I think that sounds amazing. I think what the conveyancing community might appreciate, Simon, is if when you're at these meetings, you could say to the relevant people in government, please talk to conveyancers, because of course it's us that have to deal with this stuff. And I mean, don't even get me started on the Building Safety Act, because I literally won't stop. But I think the really serious point for conveyancers here, and this is, I think, a massive fault of the lenders as well as the government not doing the job properly with the act in the first place, and that's just my personal view, but is, for example, the leaseholder deed of certificate. It went from essentially being, and as you say, a rather poorly drafted, Word document available on just the government website, which anybody could complete, as you say. We went from that being essentially a self-certification exercise by the leaseholder completing it, to the lenders requiring a number of lenders requiring the conveyancer to verify that document, to verify that information. And similarly, the height of buildings are many marvelous things, as is Stu, but building height surveyors, we are not, and yet it's the conveyancers that are constantly taking this stuff on the chin, and we're having to deal with it on a daily basis. And I just think anything that can assist that process, but I do just think that conveyancers need to be at the heart of this. How's this going to work on a daily basis? Yeah. Is sadly lacking, I have to say. But I do think trying to do to make the forms better has got to be part of the process.
You did say don't get you started. I fear I have.
Oh, no, that was me. That was me starting and finishing quickly, Simon. Poor Stu has to listen to me rant, but it's such a big thing. I mean, I go around the country and teaching this stuff, and it's quite extraordinary. And as well as we do, the effect on the leasehold market has become a very, very serious thing. And again, the height of the building thing, I mean, it's extraordinary that you've mentioned it, and you've said it's a difficult thing to do, and yet Stu's team every day are expected to give some sort of tacit confirmation that it's a relevant building, and we're supposed to know the height of it and all the rest of it. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, and I mean, we've kind of started the conversation, but we need to slowly withdraw from it. But what we're trying to achieve, and there doesn't appear to be a full and complete data set available. But what we're trying to do where possible through the register is we're mocking up a kind of traffic light system to confirm that a building definitely isn't a relevant building, or it definitely is. Now, there's an awful lot that might fall into the maybe, but then that will be an evolving picture as we get more and more data. But there's so many variables, so many conflicting areas. For example, you mentioned the lenders, and lenders all seem to have different criteria and different attitudes and different policies around it. So yeah, it's a mess where there's actually no winners.
No, right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, Stu, you were saying when we talked about this a week or two ago, the Building Safety Act affected transactions you're dealing with, you were still sort of dealing with cash buyers. Is that mainly still the case?
Mainly cash buys, certainly not with the lenders that are causing the issues anyway. It's such a difficult one. I don't know where we go with this. I honestly don't. It's just one that's going to rumble on and on and on and on. And you kind of hope, don't you, that with many things that affect our profession, that it's all going to come out in the wash at some point. But this certainly doesn't look like it's going to be one anytime soon. And I think, Lorraine, it's one of those sort of big things, isn't it? Every single time, something new comes out in terms of a problem that affects the conveyancing world, more often or not, there's been zero consultation with conveyancers. And that seems to be a reoccurring theme again.
I just think this is such a big one, I have to say. I think it's the worst one I can think of in my eight years of qualification. So, Simon, back to logbooks, because as you say, bless you, I could rant on about the Building Safety Act till, the cows come home. So, I mean, in terms of, this sounds an awful thing to say, but, because I'm always going on about the fragmented market, is your target sort of audience in terms of clients and customers law firms?
Yes, it is, it's an interesting one, because you talked about kind of uptake and that kind of tipping point, and we had an audience with the one of the housing ministers. There's been several over the last few years, but he talked on that very subject and was very, very keen to see how government could help accelerate that. He fell short of saying they would mandate, but they can kind of help influence in areas where they do have influence, and some of these government-backed schemes are those. And that's what I was talking about earlier with this first scheme. It takes time, but we'll get there. But my own company, yes, we had various routes to market, some of which proved less successful than others, but we're convinced that the conveyancing community is the first and safest way, in the sense that you're dealing with certainty post-completion, and in the nicest possible way, we're piggybacking on your industry's professionalism and works in confirming that Mr. and Mrs. A are Mr. and Mrs. A, and the property is correct to be bought, the title's correct, etc., etc. And only at that point, post completion, is the property logbook created and uploaded to the register. So there's a degree of certainty there that any logbook on there has had that. Has been through the process and is certified through that conveyancing process.
So what would your pitch be to firms who are watching this, who are thinking, actually, you know what, I think that might be, I think that might be a good idea? What would you say would be the top, what would be your top reason for doing it for firms? The hard-pressed conveyancer, the decision-maker conveyancer who's just getting calls and emails, bombarded all the time, too busy to actually turn their mind to this stuff. Sounds like a good idea, but, manana.
Well, okay. I mean, there's a danger this sounds glib, and clearly I haven't prepared it. But there's one. It's good for your client. They will benefit down the line for having this record and maintaining this record for the next major activity, whether that be applying for additional funding on the property, or coming to sell the property, or whatever it may be. But it's also good for the conveyancer for some of the reasons I outlined in terms of this ongoing relationship through the logbook, because we, as National Deeds Depository, we communicate with the client a couple of times a year just to see, everything's all right. Subliminal contact, which they sign up to, and just stress the importance of, have you had your boiler service? Make sure you put the maintenance record in, because it is important. It may not seem as though it's an important document, but yes, it is. And we offer the option to the conveyancing firm that registered that to actually piggyback on with just 200 words about something that may have happened at that organisation. And it's an easy way of just reminding them, perhaps have they updated their will with their new property or whatever. And it's also down the pub on a Friday night, if somebody says, oh, you bought a house last year, who did you use? I hate to say it, but most people say, I can't actually remember. We're keeping this post-completion communication, just keeps a kind of subtle level of communication and awareness.
I think it's a big benefit, that is, because I don't think law firms have the capacity to keep in touch with clients. And I don't think it's something that we would ever consider doing.
I don't think it's actually, I'll go further, Stu. I don't think it's something that firms are actually very good at. I mean, you and I have been in practice long enough to know that firms just aren't very good at it.
No. So, do we ever sort of get in touch with our client base, maybe 18 months after completion? Could be coming up to the end of a fixed rate. Are they looking to remortgage? Bear us in mind, blah, 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 blah. But I think, keeping in contact with the client, that logo and your branding continually going out periodically over a period is a powerful proposition from a conveyancing point of view.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be salesy. It's just that little tap on the shoulder of just kind of remember us. And also we work into the logbooks on leasehold, for example, when key terms are coming up. So if the lease is being run down to a critical term, it can generate a trigger. So it could potentially bring in kind of additional work for that firm further down the line in terms of renewing a lease or what have you.
I could see a massive benefit actually in making more leasehold information available more readily, because clients get sent so much guff. If you could streamline the accounts that they receive and all that old buff and get them to upload it, you then sort of break the stranglehold of these terrible management companies that are charging 500 quid a pop plus for you to be made to wait 10 weeks for a management pack. If 95% of that, apart from the current ground rent receipt, and service charge receipt, can be stuck in somebody's logbook, to my mind, that's where there'd be a massive benefit both to conveyancers and to their leasehold clients.
A question for you then, Lorraine. Have you been listening in on some of the RLBA calls lately with the TPI and others?
Well, funnily enough, no. No, not at all. But there you go.
Like all these things, it's an ongoing conversation, but there seems to be some kind of common understanding of the benefit of harboring that kind of information, maybe behind a paywall, but it's there and it can be taken immediately, if you like, and it's there and, as I say, available without having to wait 10 weeks or whatever, because all these things bit by bit just slow the process, add additional cost, and that's one of the major reasons for fall throughs. And one of the strap lines we use, which is pretty rubbish, so I'll apologize in advance, but we're trying to create a buyer aware situation rather than buyer beware with the availability of information up front and availability of comprehensive information through a logbook, which in many cases goes above and beyond what's required today and even required in parts B and C and whatever else is down the line.
Well, Stu, I mean, the leasehold information, that's the absolute sort of management packs. That's, one of the banes of your life, isn't it, really?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, the clients are going to periodically get new sort of building insurance, aren't they? Like you said, year-end accounts, ground rent demands, service charge demands, all of that's coming in, regular intervals. So again, the ability to upload those and present those at the time a lawyer asks for it is massively beneficial, rather than, the faff of getting all that information in. The downtime at the start of a leasehold transaction where you await the client to get that documentation together, 90% of the time it never is,
if they've even got it.
If they've got it, exactly. So I think it's got huge benefits.
Yeah, we do too. Obviously, I think it's a big boat to turn, but there's I think if we get it right, there's actually benefits for all parties, and that should be the equation for a successful project, because there wouldn't really be any losers in that scenario, because it's easy for everybody.
The difficulty for the logbook industry is getting that point across to clients. I think conveyancers may well understand it, but it's getting the point across to a client that actually this will save you time, possibly money, and so on and so forth. Because, of course, when they enter into the conveyancing transaction, the thing that they don't have at the forefront of their mind is, collecting documents, and the fact it could take, 14, 15, 16 weeks. There could be these delays. And I think sometimes, from a layperson's point of view, why would things take so long? Why would a management company charge me this much money and take this amount of time to get things over? So it is that education process.
Oh, I agree, Stuart. I mean, it's the hard yards of running around and knocking on the doors of all these individual organisations, and that's why a kind of top-down approach, if you get it right, is massively beneficial. It doesn't always work out that way. And funnily enough, and this is an absolutely true story, I read one of the trade publications. It was I think it was Estate Agents Today, and there was an article about a new affiliate member for the Conveyancing Association. And I read it, and there was some related matters underneath, and it said conveyancers want logbooks for every home. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I clicked on it thinking, well, I didn't write that. I don't know who's done this. I read it, and it was from the Conveyancing Association, saying they would like a logbook for every home, and it would ease the process, etc., etc., etc. And I looked at the date, and it was March 2017.
Well, there we go. There we go.
And listen, there's a lot. Sorry, I was just going to say, before that goes out, there's a lot of very nice and very, very good people, and we really appreciate things take time. But it did make me smile, because I've lived through all of those 6.5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also, I mean, I think a serious point, perhaps to end on in a way, Simon, which sounds a bit negative. I don't mean it to, but I think actually with the state of the conveyancing kind of market and transaction at the moment, I actually think your conveyancing clients need to be almost sort of, selling the benefit of this to buyers at the beginning of a transaction, because if actually you don't mention it till the end, by the time a buyer has waited, I don't know, however many weeks the average transaction has taken now, that, they're so jaundiced, they're so fed up, they don't want to think about it anymore. They just want to, move their stuff and have a party and do a bit of painting or whatever. So actually the thought, it's punting it at completion, to my mind, is the wrong time, because the client is already very, very fed up with the whole process. Whereas actually to be kind of educating the buyer client at the beginning and saying, God, wouldn't it be great to have all this, might be a good place to hit.
That's definitely the best time, because you're about to be sending the clients numerous documents on the property that they're buying. So, why wouldn't they then want it to have it all kept in a safe place?
And you're right, Lorraine. I mean, it's an interesting conversation, and it's a conversation that Stuart and I have certainly had on numerous occasions. We have a number of clients who mandate the logbook, so they include it in their quotation, and those companies that mandate it, they're kind of smaller and medium-sized firms, I would guess, and their fall through on that, i.e., a client saying a purchaser saying, I don't want that, is so small it's almost not worth measuring. The issue is when it's not mandated and not part of the original quotation as to where it actually fits. And I agree with you. Once you get through to the end, they're only interested in getting the keys, and I always say knocking out the avocado bathroom suite and putting a new one in, and knocking out the kitchen and doing that kind of stuff. They're not interested in a property logbook because they think they've bought their forever home.
That's a very good point. And I think also, but they're also, as I say, they're sick of the process, they're sick of documents, they're in a lot of cases, and as Stu said, particularly on a leasehold, it will have all just been too damn painful, quite frankly, assuming that they're in a building that's less than 5 stories high. Well, Simon, we could probably chat on about this all day, and I suppose we've all got to go and do other things. Stu, is there anything else you wanted to kind of ask Simon about or mention in conclusion?
No, I just think though, there is a bigger picture to it, as Simon sort of alluded to, with the marketing from law firms, but also I think in terms of client profiling. One of the big difficulties we have is when clients don't have documents, we're trying to link them to the property that they're selling. There's, all these, question marks that you have. Well, if you've got all this documentation sitting there, goes a long way. And like Simon said, it's all, stamped in terms of where that came from at the time. And what a better way, if you are profiling your client and you're trying to link, your client to a property where, you can actually revisit who originally acted for them, who uploaded that documentation. And of course, if you've got any problems, you've got a record of that firm and so on and so forth. So definitely goes a long way in terms of helping out.
Absolutely.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for joining us. I found it really enlightening, actually, and we'd be genuinely lovely to get you back to talk about the next phase. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Stuart. And yes, it would be genuinely lovely to have the opportunity to come back another time. So thank you very much indeed. Excellent. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.